All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started then. Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here with us today for our wrap-up event for HNTS-MRG 2024. As a quick note, this session will be recorded and the slides will be publicly released on Figshare after the event. Here's our agenda for today. We'll be giving a quick overview of the challenge, which will be followed by talks from the top 3 scoring teams in Task 1, followed by a keynote talk by Dr. Clifton Fuller. We'll then have a short break, or not, depending on how time is going, followed by presentations from the top 3 scoring teams in Task 2, and then closing with the award ceremony and summary results from the challenge. All right, on to these introduction slides. To give some quick background on motivation for the challenge, MRI-guided radiotherapy is a cutting-edge technique in head and neck cancer treatment. Due to the ease of acquiring longitudinal imaging with no exposure to ionizing radiation, it allows us to potentially target tumors with much greater precision while reducing side effects for patients compared to conventional approaches. However, manually segmenting tumors for MRI-guided RT is time-consuming and can be a significant bottleneck in clinical workflows. So that's where AI comes in. And the Mackay challenges like Hector have shown the potential of AI in advancing tumor autosegmentation. But there's still a gap in knowledge, especially when it comes to large AI-ready data sets for adaptive RT. With this in mind, we developed the HNTS-MRG 2024 challenge, focusing specifically on automated tumor segmentation for MRI-guided radiotherapy in head and neck cancer. And here's a general timeline of events for this challenge. We opened the grand challenge site in April, released the training data in June, and opened the evaluation phases in August, and are now having this wrap-up event in October. Next, let's quickly talk about the data that we used. We focus on T2-weighted MRI scans of the head and neck, primarily involving patients with oropharyngeal squamous cell carcinoma treated with radiotherapy. Worthy of note, we also included some cancer of unknown primary cases, as their imaging and treatment characteristics were similar to the OPC cases. And overall, our data set included 202 patients. So from these 202 patients, we collected images at 2 key time points: pre-radiotherapy, which is 1 to 3 weeks before the treatment starts, and mid-radiotherapy, which is 2 to 4 weeks into treatment. And these scans were acquired using a variety of MRI scanners, ensuring that we captured a broad range of imaging protocols. Here's an example of some imaging data from 2 patients. The patient in the top row had a non-fat suppressed T2-weighted sequence, while the patient in the bottom row had a fat suppressed sequence. So this shows you the potential diversity of images you could see in this data set, even though they were all technically T2-weighted. So in this study, we focused on 2 critical structures, the gross primary tumor, GTVP, and metastatic regional lymph nodes, GTVN. Each of these cases was independently segmented by 3 to 4 expert physician annotators. And in total, 13 unique physician annotators contributed to this data set, each with at least 2 years of experience in the field. These physicians had access to patient medical histories and prior imaging to aid in their segmentations if needed. To combine these multiple annotations into a single reference standard, we use the staple algorithm, which is a widely accepted method for generating consensus segmentations from multiple inputs. And these segmentations were all checked by a senior radiation oncology faculty member. And in cases where there was significant disagreement between observers, such as dispute over the extent of lymph node involvement, the final decision was deferred to a senior faculty member who generated the final segmentation. This is a visual example of the mask labeling scheme for this challenge, where the background is equal to 0, the GTVP is equal to 1 in green in this image, and the GTVN is equal to 2 or yellow in this image. So let's talk about the data pre-processing methods. First, we converted the DICOM images and structure files into Nifty format. Additionally, we cropped the images to focus specifically on the head and neck region, from the top of the clavicles to the nasal septum. And this ensured greater consistency across the dataset and also removed facial features without affecting the segmentation masks. As an additional processing step, mainly for use in Task 2 solutions, we registered the pre-RT images to the mid-RT images. And we utilized a registration framework using simple ITK and elastics for deformable registration, specifically using a parameter map from the elastic model zoo that's been validated in similar studies. In a small minority of cases where the deformable registration led to excessive warping, we opted to use just the rigid transformation. Sorry, skip a slide. Sorry, I got some lag here. Okay, from the 202 patients we collected, we split this into 150 cases for a training set and held out 52 cases for private evaluation. We partition the data to ensure similar distributions across key factors like fat suppression status, tumor response, staging, and HEV status, amongst others. And as you can see from these plots here, the partitioning achieved a close match between the training and the test sets across several parameters, where each of these plots is the training data on the left and the test data on the right, and those distributions are similar. And as most of you are aware, we publicly released the training data set of images and masks on Zenodo under a Creative Commons license. To talk about the tasks a little, task 1 focused on predicting segmentations for the GTVP and GTVN on unseen pre-RT images. And so this task is analogous to previous segmentation challenges like Hector 2022 and SegRap 2023. And as shown in the diagram, the input is simply just a pre-RT MRI and the output was a predicted segmentation. Similarly, for task 2, we focused on predicting GTVP and GTVN, but this time on unseen mid-RT images. And by definition, this task is a more complex task compared to task 1. Participants could use multiple inputs, including both the pre-RT and mid-RT images, along with registered pre-RT images and segmentations to develop accurate algorithms. And this task is somewhat analogous to prior challenges that utilize multiple imaging inputs like SegRap, which use registered CT and Connors-enhanced CT, and HNTS-MRG, which used MRI and CT. For this challenge, we employed the aggregated dice similarity coefficient, or DICE-AG, to evaluate the segmentation results. This metric was originally used in Hector 2022, and the aggregated dice calculates the overlap between predicted and ground truth segmentations aggregated across the entire test set, as opposed to traditional dice, which is calculated for each patient. Also, unlike traditional dice, the aggregated dice is particularly well suited for our challenge since the presence of structures like GTVP and GTVN may vary across cases. So this makes it more robust in handling scenarios where some structures might be missing, which reduces the impact of false positive or negatives when segmentations are absent. And so we calculated the aggregated dice for both GTVP and GTVN separately, and then averaged the two for the final ranking. The submissions for the challenge were managed through grandchallenge.org, utilizing a Docker container or Docker containers to ensure standardized and fair evaluation. The submission process was divided into 2 phases. The first was a preliminary development phase designed to help participants familiarize themselves with Docker. And these initial submissions focused on relatively simple segmentation cases for 2 patients and did not influence the final rankings. It was purely for practicing. And the second phase was the final test phase, where participants submitted their final algorithm for evaluation. And this involved evaluating the algorithms on 50 unseen test cases. And so each team was allowed only 1 valid submission in this phase, which was used to officially rank their performance. We developed some baseline models for this challenge, which were built on the NN unit architecture. For task 1, we trained the NN unit using only pre-RT images, and the model was set up with the full 3D resolution, trained over 1,000 epochs, and validated using 5-fold cross-validation. In task 2, the NN unit was trained similarly, but this time with mid-RT images as input. And we also included a null model for task 2 as a simple baseline. And so this model essentially just uses the registered pre-RT segmentations directly as a mid-RT prediction, kind of as a simplified approach. I'd also like to quickly talk about inter-observer variability in our data set. Since we had multiple annotators per case, we could calculate measures of inter-observer variability, which could also serve as benchmarks for the challenge. We calculated both traditional dice and aggregated dice to quantify the consistency between annotators across multiple cases. So traditional dice offers pairwise geometric comparisons between observers, allowing for a straightforward measure of variability. The box plot here shows the values for that. But more germane to our challenge, we also calculated a measure of variability for aggregated dice. And calculating this was a little more involved, but to briefly summarize, we first computed the pairwise intermediate measures between every annotator's segmentation for each case. And these pairwise measures were then aggregated across all the cases for each unique annotator pair. So you end up with an aggregated dice for observer 1 versus observer 2, and then an aggregated dice for observer 1 versus observer 3, etc. And then lastly, we derived the final inter-observer variability aggregated dice score by taking a weighted average of all these annotator pair values, with the weight determined by the number of cases each annotator pair contributed. And those numbers are shown here, which are fairly close to the measures calculated with the traditional dice, but slightly higher, which indicate less variability. And so we'll talk more about these specific numbers for inter-observer variability at the end of the conference, but just to quickly mention, for pre-RT, the aggregated dice, we got a mean value of 0.806, and for mid-RT, we got a mean value of 0.714. And the inter-observer variability got worse, particularly for the mid-RT GTVP, which decreased from 0.757 to 0.6, which is mostly expected since mid-RT segmentation is a harder process than pre-RT segmentation. I'll also quickly note that we excluded cases where only the senior faculty annotator provided the final segmentation, which might be setting a slightly higher bar than usual for these measures. But yeah, we'll return to this later. Finally, we'd like to note that we had strong participation in the challenge with 107 registrants across the globe. For task 1, we had 95 valid entries submitted, with 75 in the development phase and 20 in the testing phase. And in task 2, we had 69 valid entries with 54 in the development phase and 15 in testing. Ultimately, after everything was said and done, we had 19 teams that were determined to be eligible for the leaderboard. Okay, and so I think we might have time for a question or two on these intro slides. I don't know if we have any questions in the chat or anything yet. If not, we can just move on. Give it a second here. Okay, if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and move on here. But by the way, you can always ask questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll try to answer those as we see them. Okay, we're going to move on to the task 1 talk session now. This session will be moderated by Dr. Dede. We'll begin with 3 pre-recorded presentations, each followed by a live Q&A with the authors. Just a quick note, we've asked the authors not to reveal their test set performance during these presentations, so please don't ask them that as a question. Also, the order of the presentations doesn't reflect any rankings, so be sure to stick around for the award ceremony to find out the final ranking results. All right, bring Jem in here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dede, and I'll be your moderator for this session. First, I would like to thank Kareem for the excellent introductory overview. And we have 3 outstanding presentations for task 1 today, and each speaker will have 7 minutes to present, followed by 3 minutes for Q&A. And please feel free to submit your question in the chat, and I'll address them during the Q&A period. Let's begin with our first presentation, titled Automatic Segmentation Frameworks for Head and Neck Tumors Using MRI Scans, presented by Nico Moradi from Sharif University of Technology. Nico will be discussing their team's approach to the McKay challenge, focusing on the segmentation of primary and metastatic gross tumor volumes using pre- and mid-RT MRI images. Nico, you have 7 minutes.
And we'll play the video. Sorry about this, folks. We're just getting the video up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nico Moradi. I'm a senior bachelor student studying electrical engineering in Sharif University of Technology. And today I'm presenting our approach to the task 1 of the HNTS-MRG 24 MICAI challenge. The goal of this challenge is to automate the segmentation of primary and metastatic lymph node tumor volumes in MRI-guided radiotherapy for head and neck cancer. Manual segmentation of these tumors, which is the current clinical standard, is extremely time-consuming and impractical. Moreover, the complexity of head and neck anatomy makes this process particularly difficult. This is where deep learning-based methods can be applied, and in this way, we can increase both speed and accuracy. To start, let's talk about the dataset we had. The HNTS-MRG dataset consists of 150 samples, and each sample included both pre-radiotherapy and mid-radiotherapy images, which from now on, we're going to call them pre-RT and mid-RT. And they all had a T2-weighted modality. Each patient also included a segmentation mask of 2 labels. The first label was lymph node tumor volume, and the second one was the primary gross tumor volume. Also, a pre-processing step was already done, which registered the pre-RT images to the mid-RT images, and this allowed us to use both of these images at the same time together. Additionally, using public external data was allowed in this challenge, but it was really difficult to find a public data set that matches perfectly with the HNTS-MRG data. Anyways, we experimented on Brad's meningioma radiotherapy dataset. It includes 500 samples of T1 weighted MRI images of brain region. It only includes one label, which is the segmentation of gross tumor volume, and also a defacing preprocessing step was already done. Let's move on to the networks. We used two models, NNUnit and MedNext. First, NNUnit is an automated framework which configures itself based on the dataset. Here you can see the pipeline. Actually, we didn't change the code. We just used three different configurations. First, the 3D full resolution, then 3D cascade, and then residual encoder planner. Next, we used MedNext, which is a newer transformer-based model. Here we experimented with small size and large size with two different kernel sizes, 3 and 5. And again, you can see the pipeline here. Our solution for task 1 involves a multi-stage training approach. In the first step, we pre-trained both NNUnit and MedNext models on mid-RT and registered pre-RT images. In total, we pre-trained on 300 samples. And then we fine-tuned all of these models on original pre-RT images. One of the challenges we faced during this step was that some MedNext models faced instability issues while training. And basically, we were only able to train MedNext small with kernel size 3 successfully, and we weren't really able to train other models of MedNext successfully, and we weren't able to compare them together. Anyways, after training all of these models, we applied the default NNUnit ensemble method on every combination of these three NNUnit models, and we also experimented with average ensembling, which we combined the predictions of MedNext and the best performing NNUnit model. This is also the pipeline of using external data. Here we added Brad's dataset into the pre-training step, and we used 800 samples in total for this step, and the fine-tuning step remains the same. And we also only used NNUnit full resolution configuration for this experiment. Now let's move on to the results for task 1. In this table, you can see the results of our main experiment. You can see aggregated DICE score for each NNUnit model and all of their combination, as well as MedNext, and the average ensemble of MedNext and the best performing NNUnit, which in this case is the ensemble of Cascade and residual encoder. The MedNext small with kernel size 3 had the highest DICE score and outperformed all of the other models. And surprisingly, the average ensemble of MedNext and NNUnit had lower performance, and we just observed that there was a decrease in the number of true positive and an increase in the number of false positive and false negatives. This is basically because while both models perform very well individually, they just disagree on some regions. Just so you know, we also checked if there's a shift or bias or just any mismatch between the predictions of NNUnit and MedNext, but this was not the case. We also evaluated the performance of the pre-trained models on predicting the original pre-RT images, and interestingly, they had a higher aggregated DICE score compared to the fine-tuned models. This observation is basically because the pre-training process used all the available input samples, and there were no separate validation sets. And they have already seen all the registered pre-RT images, and because of the fact that original and registered pre-RT images are highly similar, it is actually expected for the pre-trained models to perform very well on a data that was kind of already seen. And technically, this evaluation is not a reliable measure of performance of these pre-trained models, and in the end, we concluded that the fine-tuned models would most probably generalize better on unseen data. In this table, you can see the results of experimenting with external data. As you can see, using Brad's dataset almost adds no value to the segmentation of head and neck cancer. Several factors likely contributed to this observation. First, the Brad's dataset includes only one label, whereas our challenge data requires the segmentation of two labels. Second, the Brad's dataset contains brain images, while the Hunts-Merge challenge is focused on head and neck area, which is way more complex. And lastly, the Brad's dataset had T1 weighted images, but in our challenge, we had T2 weighted images, and this may lead to a difference in the features learned during pre-training. Our final submission for this task was MedNext, small with kernel size 3, pre-trained on mid-RT and registered pre-RT images, and then fine-tuned on original pre-RT. Here we provided an example prediction of case 78. In the left side, you can see the prediction of MedNext with the best performance. In the middle, you can see the performance of average ensemble of NNUnit and MedNext with the lowest performance. And in the right side, you can see the ground truth. In conclusion, the MEDNEX small with kernel size 3 was the most effective model, and it outperformed all of the NNUnet configurations. We faced some instability issues while training other MEDNEX architectures, which needs to be addressed in future works. Surprisingly, the average ensemble of NNUnet and MEDNEX didn't lead to better results, and in fact, it lowered the performance. The pre-trained models achieved a higher aggregated dice score, but this evaluation is not really valid, and these pre-trained models may not generalize well on unseen data. Additionally, using Brad's dataset didn't improve the performance of segmenting head and neck cancer, and it was proved that using domain-specific data is a crucial step. Overall, our approach successfully demonstrates the potential of MEDNEX for segmenting in head and neck cancer radiotherapy. And last but not least, I would like to thank my supervisors and collaborators on this challenge, Andre Ferreira, Behruz Pouradi, Jens Klisik, Emad Fatemizadeh, Guy Sluitgen, and Jan Egger, as well as the organizers of the HuntSmerge 24 challenge. I truly appreciate your continuous support throughout this project, and this challenge was an amazing experience for me. Thank you all for your attention.
We thank Nico for this insightful presentation, and we will now take questions for the next 3 minutes. And feel free to ask your questions in the chat box, please. While waiting for other questions, I have a direct question. And Nico, you mentioned that MEDNEX small with kernel size 3 outperformed all other models, but other MEDNEX configurations faced instability issues during the training. What do you think caused the instability in those larger MEDNEX models, and how might this be addressed in your future work?
Thank you very much for your question. Actually, this was a really big concern for us as well. And we didn't investigate this problem for task 1, but we did do this for task 2 because we faced way more serious problems with MEDNEX for task 2. And we noticed that when we removed samples that included 0 ground truth, the training process went smoothly and successfully until the end for 100 epochs. But actually, the performance of this model was not as good because the number of training samples were decreased. So this might be an issue, but as I said, we didn't investigate further into this problem because we already had a MEDNEX model that was performing very well.
One of our audience has this question. Nico is asking, regarding the usage of MRIs from the other organ, maybe using the multi-talent developed by DKFZ would be the better option to see its positive effects. What do you think about this?
Actually, I don't really know about, I haven't heard about this before. It definitely can be a good idea. I just need to maybe learn about this a bit. And yeah, thank you very much for your suggestion.
We will be moving on with the next presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have a question here.
Oh, okay. For the time being, we have to pass this one, and let's discuss this at the end.
The quick question.
In the Q&A section.
Sorry? Okay.
Let's discuss this in the Q&A section and move on with the presentation. Next, we have Mehdi Astaraki presenting for a Stockholm Trio theme from University of Stockholm, presenting on head and neck tumor segmentation for MRI-guided adaptive radiotherapy. Mehdi's work highlights the integration of pre and mid-RT data to improve segmentation accuracy for radiation therapy planning. And this presentation will take 7 minutes, maybe.
Hello everyone, my name is Mehdi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher from Karolinska Institute and Stockholm University from Stockholm, Sweden. And here I would like to present my contribution to the head and neck tumor segmentation for MR guided application MICAI 2024 challenge. So this challenge actually holds two tasks. Task one for segmentation of the head and neck tumor, including the both primary tumor and lymph node involvement in pre-radiation treatment, T2-weighted MR images, and task two basically include the same object, but for the mid-RT segmentation. For training data, actually 150 cases were available for the development, and finally we need to submit the models for evaluation over the 15 testing sets. So actually the cohort, the training cohort include different variations between the pre-treatment and mid-treatment. So we could see the different response of the tumors to the applied treatment. For example, there were cases that both primary and lymph node partially responded to the treatment. There were cases that the tumors actually progressed. There were cases that there were significant response to the applied treatment. For example, the lymph node completely gone, with significant shrinkage in the primary tumor, or the other way around, where, for example, there were cases that the primary tumors were completely gone, while there were significant shrinkage to the lymph node involvement. So I started with a pre-processing task in two steps. Step one includes the pre-processing on the geometry, on the basically the array of the data. So I employed a set of thresholding and morphological operators to maximally crop the volumes around the tissue of interest. Basically, this better help us to avoid loading the data into patches by including, for example, the background tissue or irrelevant tissue, like, for example, the shoulder region. And in the second actually includes the intensity-based pre-processing that I first applied the M4 bias field correction. Second, I checked the maximum intensity value of each subject, and for those that contains the maximum value larger than 700, I applied this simple thresholding by setting it to 99 percentile and clip the rest. And finally, followed by the standardized scoring normalization. And for the segmentation, I conducted a methodology by evaluating the performance of different segmentation models, mostly the state-of-the-art and robust segmentation models. So the first model was the SegResNet model with deep supervision. The model included 6 stages of resolution in the encoder layer with this number of the convolutional blocks of each resolution. The model was trained for 500 epochs with batch size of 4 level of deep supervision, and patch size of 96 by 160 by 128. The objective function includes the dice and cross entropy. The second model included an unit residual encoder with a medium level size. So the encoder stage includes 6 stages of resolution with this number of the convolution blocks for each resolution. The model was trained, or the model were trained for 1,200 epochs with the patch size of 64, 224, and 160. And basically with the standard configurations of the NN unit. The third model includes the METNext. I employed a small kernel size, 3 by 3 by 3, with isotropic spacing of 1 millimeter with a patch size of 128 by 128 by 128, and the model were trained for 1,000 epochs. And finally, the fourth model was a UMAMBA that actually I employed as out of the box with the default configurations. So in the experiment, actually for task 1, I include only the pre-treatment MRI volume. So I did not include the mid-treatment MRI volumes into the task 1 training. But for task 2, I conducted a set of experiments. So first I include only the mid-RT volume. Then I include the pre-treatment, the registered pre-treatment MRI as a prior information. In another experiment, I include both the pre-treatment MRI and pre-treatment segmentation mask as prior information, and also I include another experiment including only the segmentation mask of the pre-treatment to the mid-treatment data. But also what I did, I applied this sign distance map. Basically, I dilated the pre-treatment segmentation mask with the structural element with the size of 3 by 3 by 3, so a bit extending the size of that, and then compute the sign distance map or sign distance function of this extended binary maps. And then finally include the sign distance map from the pre-treatment segmentation mask into the mid-RT as prior information. As an example here, we see, for example, from the pre-treatment MRI with the overlay segmentation mask, the second row shows the images that highlighting the sign distance map, basically this option. And finally, the last row shows the mid-RT with overlay segmentation mask. So directly to the result for the first task, the pre-RT, we applied the SegResNet residual encoder model, MetNext, UMamba on the original data and pre-processed data. So the quantitative values in terms of dice basically show the superiority of the performance over the pre-processed data, in which residual encoder model resulted the best performance on segmenting the primary tumor, and also the MetNext resulted in the best performance over the lymph node environment. Accordingly, I did this ensembling between the residual encoder and MetNext to segment, basically with residual encoder segmenting the primary tumor, and with MetNext to segment the lymph node involvement that resulted in the best performing model during the development phase. For the second task, the mid-RT, basically I mainly employed the NN-unit residual encoder model because the other models constantly ended up with inferior performance compared to the residual encoder model. Over the ordinary data, no prior information, with MR as prior, with segmentation mask as prior, with both segmentation mask and MR as prior, and also with the distance map as prior information. Over the original data and pre-processed data, of course, the result over the pre-processed data was much accurate than the original data. And using this prior information resulted in the much more robust compared to the other scenario. So some qualitative result that we see basically for the first row on task 1 and task 2, the segmentation of the primary in red and lymph node in green, and the second row, the result of segmentation. Of course, there were some failure, but for many cases, actually, the result was quite robust. And finally, for the final submission, actually, we had some problem with the to meet the requirement over the computational time. In my local experience on my local machine, basically the inference time for task 1, when I ensembled the ResEng and MetNext model over different folds, actually it took less than 6 minutes. For task 2, it took 3 minutes to ensemble over 5 different folds of residual encoder model. However, basically these were not enough to meet the 20 minutes requirements on the Grand Challenge platform. So I heavily simplified the model. So for the task 1, I skipped ensembling between MetNext and ResEng. I included only 3 folds of the MetNext, and for task 2, only include 3 folds over the residual encoder model. So as a summary, in this experiment, actually, I investigated the effect of pre-processing, including intensity, volume, and prior information. Also, I investigated the performance of some of the state-of-the-art segmentation model and found that ensembling of the residual encoder and MetNext resulted in the best performance model. With that, I would like to appreciate the challenge organizer for holding this challenge, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mehdi, for your presentation. And we will now open the floor for the questions for next 3 minutes. Please type the questions in the chat, and I'll be addressing them. Okay, I got the first question. Oh, so one of our audience was asking, was the result values based on DSC or DSCAG?
So thank you for the question. Actually, I reported only on those tables the individual dice scores, not the aggregated ones.
For the next question, you mentioned using several prior information strategies, such as incorporating sign distance maps from pre-treatment segmentation masks into the mid-treatment segmentation. And how did the sign distance maps compare to other prior information strategies in improving segmentation performance? And were there any cases where they introduced complications?
Thank you for the question. So actually, I actually conducted a set of methodology. I noticed that if I use the segmentation mask from the pre-treatment as prior information, it actually caused a kind of binarized hypothesis. So like if the tumor significantly shrink, this binarized hypothesis actually would confuse the learning procedure of the network. Then also including the second, the MR images, it was not really helpful also because of perhaps adding a lot of information. But again, if the tumor completely shrinks, still the prior information includes all those areas. So it was a bit of confusing. So what I did actually, considering the fact that even maybe the tumor not only shrink or progress, but maybe, I don't know, the tumor even, I mean, maybe biologically not relevant. I'm not a, I don't know, cancer biologist, but if the tumor even moved, like relocated a bit toward the surrounding tissue, like progress toward the surrounding tissue, then I decided to extend it first and then compute this science distance map to provide a kind of, non-binarized hypothesis for the segmentation task. At least in the development phase, it's actually, I mean, quantitative results show that it was helpful, but definitely there would be problem with those cases that either primary or the lymph node completely disappears, because still we have this kind of hypothesis, prior information as a distance map, but there is no real tumor there. So I applied, I mean, quantitatively it shows some improvement, but I believe it should not be the best approach to use the prior information as a sign distance map.
Thank you again, Mehdi. There's one other question, but let's move ahead and ask this question in the Q&A section afterwards. So our final presentation for task 1 is Litinho Wang. On behalf of HiLab team from University of Electronics Science and Technology of China, titled Head and Neck Tumor Segmentations of MRI from Pre- and Mid-Radiation Therapy with Pre-Training, Data Augmentation, and Dual Flow Unit.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wang Litinyu. I'm a master candidate from University of Electronic Science and Technology of China. And today I'm excited to share our method from Team HiLab with you on the challenge, specifically focusing on the task 1. Our approach to this challenge involves a multi-strategy 5-fold training regime. The first strategy is to employ fully supervised learning with an encoder-decoder-like network architecture. The second one is the first one enhanced with pre-trained ways and mix-up augmentation technique. I will share my method from the following sections. The first is our used datasets. The first one is the datasets from the challenge. We split it into 5-fold for cross-validation, and our pre-processing steps include cropping to the region of interest, normalization using this score standardizing, and resampling to a uniform voxel size here. And the images on the right is detailed process of our cropping. First, based on the intensity and passing through 2 times of morphological closing, we get a mask of human body, and then based on this mask, we crop to the region of head. And additionally, we incorporated the SIGGRAPH 2023 dataset, focusing on the contrast enhanced CT images to enrich our pre-training phase. For the pre-process, the cropping is similar to the primary datasets. And second, each image does histogram matching with a randomly selected T2-weighted MRI from the challenge datasets. And finally, the process of normalization and resampling is the same as the primary one. Our network architecture is developed from the VNets. We use instance normalization and equilibrium activation in the implementation. Then we conduct deep supervision as 4 decoder layers with higher resolution. In our pre-training phase, we utilize a patch-based approach from SIGGRAPH 2023 datasets. Each patch undergo a nonlinear transformation to bridge the gap between CT and MRI data. The nonlinear transformation are domain generalization techniques to minimize the modality gap and enhance the network ability to generalize. Moving on the downstream training parts, we incorporated mix-up, a technique that creates new training examples by doing linear interpolation among pairs of images and their labels. This not only improves the model's robustness, but also enhances its performance on foreground categories with significant numbers of voxels. While using this technique, the batch size increased from the original 2 to 4. So for the raw input patches, we do deep supervision and use cross-entropy loss and dice loss to supervise them. And for the newly generated patch by mix-up, we compute cross-entropy loss and omit deep supervision. And here is our implementation. And we evaluate our models using aggregated dice similarity coefficients. And our experiments yield promising results. Base is a basic segmentation network, which gets pre-RT as inputs, and the pre-train and mix-up is the base enhanced with pre-train weights and mix-up separately, and we use both pre-train and mix-up final. So and we selected the best performant models at each fold, and finally our selected models gets 76.35 for GTVP and 84.94 for GTVN. As can be seen from the images at the left, our visual comparison between the ground truth and our segmentations demonstrates effectiveness of our method designs. However, because of the huge gap between the CT and MRI, we can see here, the pre-trained weight can be extreme negative effects. And in conclusion, our research indicates that pre-training enhanced by domain generalization techniques can make CT data highly useful for MRI segmentation, and mix-up have proven to be an effective tool for improving the performance of foreground categories. And we have to acknowledge the limitations, particularly in the underutilization of public available pre-trained weights, for example, such as the SAM and MESAM. And the pre-training process does not change the intensity sequence of different organs in CT and MRI. Those are all about the methods of the challenge from Team HiLab. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Tinyu, for your beautiful presentation. And Tinyu, could you confirm that your mic is running?
Hello, could you hear me?
Nice. Okay, now we will move into Q&A portion of this session. Please continue. Okay, I have a question. You mentioned using domain generalization techniques such as nonlinear transformations to bridge the gap between CT and MRI data in the pre-training phase. What were the specific challenges in aligning these modalities, and how did the domain generalization techniques improve the model performance in the MRI segmentation? Okay, you can hear us.
We think the one gap between the CT and MRI is in the intensity values. During the pre-training, we use some nonlinear transformation, which can make the model focus on the structure of the image, not the intensity.
Okay. Is there any other questions from the listeners? If not, this concludes our Task 1 presentations. And thank you all presenters for your fantastic contributions. And thank you all listeners for being here. With that, we will be moving into our Keynote speaker. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Clifton Fuller, a junior professor in the Department of Radiation Oncology at University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Dr. Fuller is at the forefront of innovation in radiation oncology with his pioneering efforts in integration of digital twin models, artificial intelligence, and machine learning into clinical practice. His research is revolutionizing the cancer treatment by enabling more precise, adaptive, and personalized radiation treatment approaches. In addition, Dr. Fuller has made significant strides in imaging informatics, employing multimodal imaging techniques such as PET-CT and MRI to enhance tumor target delineation and treatment planning. His work has advanced the use of quantitative imaging biomarkers for risk stratifications and treatment adaptations, particularly in head and neck cancers. With over 300 published works, over 8 NIH research project grants, Dr. Fuller's contribution continue to shape the future of radiation oncology, bridging the gap between cutting-edge technology and patient care. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fuller, whose vision and dedication are transforming the cancer treatment.
So thanks, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. That's an extremely flowery and overwrought description of our work. But I think what's imperative, as you heard from Jim, we'll start with a kind of brief introduction. These are my funding acknowledgments and disclosures, which I'll show faster than anyone can read. But fundamentally, head and neck cancer care exists as part of a continuum within a larger group. And here at MD Anderson, we have the United States' largest cancer program focused directly on head and neck cancer. We're very fortunate, as you heard from Jim, to be part of a collaborative group with the University of Illinois, Chicago, and University of Iowa, focused on risk adaptation, and then efforts with Andrew Schaefer at Rice University looking at adaptive planning. And then finally, we exist within an ecosystem of NIH grants focused on image-guided cancer therapies and toxicity assessments. But any achievements that exist have been a function to a large degree of the work of my laboratory group, who you see here. But this is built on the work of prior labs. This is the lab group that was around when we proposed this effort. And HNTS-MRG is really the work of these folks. And I'd like to give a special credit to Dr. Kareem Wahid, Dr. Dede, Dr. Mohamed Naser, and Dr. Renji Hay, who've served as the spearheading team for this award. This award was supported by the National Institutes of Health and through the National Cancer Institute and National Institute for Dental and Craniofacial Research, through 2 awards that were designed to provide improved AI/ML readiness data sets for NIH data. And this is because, I think, as all of us are aware, there is this issue that Richard Bellman calls the curse of dimensionality, where we understand that the approaches used for higher order analyses are very difficult for humans to conceptualize. And broadly, Bellman would talk about this in the context of like large scale numbers or data that was had high velocity, the kind of classic indicators of quote unquote big data. And so you can think about these knowledge representations as being, kind of much higher when we talk about computational efforts than most humans can process easily. Now, what this meant was if we take local maps, very simplistic or two-dimensional or data-reduced understandings, humans can in some cases do pretty well. But the problem with radiation therapy is we're talking about highly spatial information. And so explicit within radiation therapy planning or radiation therapy assessment is already at least 3 dimensions of depth. And when you start adding additional imaging features, the dimensionality of almost any data set becomes larger than a human can inculcate with high spatial reliability. Now, when we look at efforts then to improve imaging and radiation therapy, this is a seminal work from 2011 by James Balter. The focus has historically been on things like image acquisition and interpretation, or determining the biomarker effects. But the goal eventually is to integrate these imaging techniques into trials that can make image-based targeting decisions. And this is kind of the long-term objective. So a lot of our work we've focused on the lab has been on MRI guidance and MRI biomarkers, because the idea of multiple representations, high-dimensional image data sets, allows us to explore these interplays between functional and anatomic information in spatial frames of reference. So what this means, though, is we need segmentations that are accurate in time and space. And we'll talk about why that's such a challenge for human observers and the need for AI-based techniques like the ones you've seen presented today so ably. If we can achieve accurate representation in a spatial data set over time, we have the capacity to then interrogate potential imaging features or biomarkers in ways that are anticipatory and can give early information, actionable in terms of changing care, or additive in terms of more than one feature. And this is really important because, again, current strategies, even in this exercise you've seen in HNTS-MRG, assume this kind of like standardized segmentation of a GTV or a gross tumor volume as if it's some uniform different substruct than the tumor and stromal microenvironment. Now, in reality, we all know that with multiple representations of things like differential imaging or pathology, that in fact, the tumor stromal environment is a highly complex system. And even the binarization we make today about where is the GTV, where is the GTV nodes are really highly dimensionally reductive. That said, as a human, trying to incorporate multiple types of imaging is virtually impossible. However, we have seen the fact that these kinds of high-dimensional imaging sets are potentially very well captured with a single series of multiparametric MR sequences, primarily because the MR has the capacity to develop individual sequences that reflect different subcomponents of this rich tumor stromal microenvironment. So, for example, dynamic contrast enhancement for vasculature, diffusion-weighted imaging, which shows cellular density with regard to cancer-associated extracellular matrix or immune cells, and cancer-associated fibroblasts, which can be seen with standard relaximetric imaging. This is a huge improvement over classic CT-based imaging, which is our current standard of care. So as an example of this, I show you some CT imaging, which is the standard by which we do adaptation currently. And you can see that while we can see the patient's outline or contours or normal structures very well, differentiating tumor versus non-tumor is virtually impossible with endogenous contrast techniques. And so this limits our capacity not only to represent the tumor in high dimensional ways, but even in low dimensional ways as tumor, non-tumor binary structs or mask. Even so, this level of just adaptation during radiotherapy on anatomic images has been shown in preliminary data sets to potentially reduce toxicity or side effects. So we've really been moving into this opportunity space because if we have better soft tissue imaging with things like T2 MRI, higher endogenous contrast like you would see with DWI or T2 weighted imaging compared to CT, that though, as you heard from the last speaker, leveraging CT-based data may be important, we're not solely reliant on low endogenous contrast scans. When we started looking at these scans over time in patients, we also found that temporality really mattered. So when we think about an image of a patient being scanned pre-radiotherapy, that's not the whole story, because during the 6 to 7 weeks of radiation therapy, that tumor volume, that tumor anatomic region is changing rapidly. And so tumors that were present at the beginning of therapy may be gone or may be so greatly reduced by mid or even late therapy. So when we looked at patients receiving radiation therapy on a clinical trial, almost half of patients had no visible tumor in the primary by the middle of radiation. And we've seen that replicate in several data sets. Again, the lack of endogenous contrast on CT has precluded a lot of these efforts from being realized. But if you look at T2, and again, I show you here T2 and DWI, you can see that these two techniques, which were the ones selected for the challenge, have comparatively high endogenous contrast to noise relative to tumor versus non-tumor structures. So without giving IV contrast, it's in fact much easier to see on T2 and diffusion weighted imaging, and that's why those were selected for the challenge. The other practical rationale for the challenge was that we have access to a hybrid MRI linear accelerator. And on this device, you have the capacity to adapt treatment on a daily basis. The patient is imaged each day, an MRI is acquired, and then multiparametric sequences can be used. The plan is then potentially adapted. However, if you do a complete resegmentation or readaptation, the patient is stuck in a mask in the bore of the treatment device for as long as it takes you to do that task manually. And so at MD Anderson, we found that those processes, if they require manual resegmentation, can mean that the patient is in the mask for as long as 45 minutes to an hour, which is not tenable over 30 to 35 daily treatments. So our current even investigational protocols kind of top out at adaptation with manual resegmentation of the tumor on a weekly basis. So we just completed a clinical trial, and the amount of workload and workflow required for this was really quite substantive as we determined. Now, early work suggests that even adaptation on like a weekly basis is likely to benefit patients. But we have some work from Rice University that suggests if we were to be able to increase this frequency to sub-weekly, that could have even greater potential effects at radiation dose reduction in normal tissues. Coupled with this is the fact that if we can use the same kinds of segmentations to monitor what's happening with functional biomarkers, we kill two birds with one stone. So one of the attractive features of the Hunts-Merge challenge was the fact that by using linked diffusion-weighted and anatomic information, the segmentations performed on these matched spatially registered data sets could be dual-purposed. And this is important because diffusion-weighted imaging, at least in early work by Abdullah Mohamed and Dina Al-Habashi from our lab, seems to be a strong predictor of later radiation response. So if you segment those diffusion-weighted images on the weekly T2 scans manually, and then you measure both volumetric changes and changes in diffusion-weighted imaging, the patients who have a delta DWI change are the ones who are most likely to be early rapid responders. And this differential is something that's patient-specific and therefore requires high-frequency segmentation. Again, work by Abdullah Mohamed has used a similar approach just on pre- and mid-therapy images and shown that this is also a potential prognostic marker. So this idea that if you could get daily imaging with daily accurate anatomic segmentation and co-registered functional imaging raises the idea of biomarker-guided adaptive radiotherapy. This capacity to identify not only the primary tumor volume, but then to subsegment within that functional subunits, which can be either dose escalated or de-escalated. But the major problem is that radiation therapy depends on human observers. And tumor delineation or tumor segmentation is the weak link in terms of accuracy. If you look at the entire chain of diagnosis, consultation, immobilization, treatment planning, setup, verification, treatment delivery, almost all of these are fairly reproducible constructs with the exception of tumor segmentation. And gross tumor volume is something physicians are incredibly poor at. So if you look at practical experiences in terms of the differences in human observers, it's exceptionally high. This is a summary article that said definition of gross tumor volumes and the subsequent clinical target volumes is a major, for some tumor locations, the largest factor in global uncertainty planning. So really, this is the rate-limiting step in almost all radiation therapy procedures. Humans are really bad at this. If you give a bunch of humans, even if you give them a location of the gross tumor volume, they will give you radically different radiation treatment plans. So distractingly variable that this is really an area of significant error and significant potential loss of efficacy in the radiation field. Dr. Wahid has demonstrated that head and neck represents a specifically harder use case. So in a very strong, a large-scale segmentation challenge where we got a large number of expert and non-expert observers, and we compared their segmentations to a statistically generated maximum likelihood consensus segmentation using map staple. It was found that among the target volumes, this is a little bit of a hard figure to see, that the variance between observers in primary tumors was fairly high, even within experts, and for non-experts was exceptionally high. Nodes did a little better. So this is something that we saw, and this is on very a single case data set. When we look at physician observers, this is work by Chris Terhard. We had a work where we took 26 physicians and we said, well, maybe it's better if we give them multi-parametric MRI. And on some tumors, they did pretty well with very good overlap indices amongst the group. But for many of these very subtle MRI multi-parametric scans, even with exogenous contrast and diffusion-weighted imaging and T2 anatomic weighted imaging, and in some cases PET scans, there was significant difficulty and variation. And the take-home message from this observer performance effort was to say that appropriate guidelines, training, and quality assurance were needed because the lack of standardization was so high. So this idea that if we could just do better with human guidelines observers has been around for several years. I've tested it as part of a research effort. Part of my thesis was a prospective effort to look at rectal cancer contouring, where we did this double-blinded experiment, and we randomized people to use an atlas or a training program, and we looked at whether they did better or more consistent with one another, and they did. But, you know, this is rectum, which is a fairly simple organ at risk, a fairly simple contrast to noise, and even in that scenario, we saw massive variation on the order of magnitude of multiple centimeters of difference among these observers. So what this shows is that for even, even well-trained, Atlas-enabled observers, simple CTV, GTV generation tasks are hard. You need massive amounts of margins to encompass this error. So is the solution to just blast more tissue? Not if your goal is increased accuracy. In the head and neck space, Sandra Neutz did a similar study where they gave a bunch of observers a very, very standardized access, and they gave them GTV target volumes. And again, it was not enough to guarantee uniform efficacy. So several years ago, we looked at these maybe we could do better with initial training and feedback. So we gave observers a training program. We gave them online feedback. The residents were then given a comparison to an expert observer, and that showed some improvement, but we were still not at anything that we would consider optimal performance. And again, nothing like the performance, in fact, you've seen or will see today in the reports that are delivered by the AI systems. Around the same time that this work was being done, there was a great increase in the number of grand challenges and imaging challenges that were occurring. So this was up to 2015, imaging challenges were on the rise. But if you look at big data challenges since that, they have exploded. And the Groningen group by Bram van Ginneken and others established the grand challenges, the efforts at McKay. This is an example of the email that they sent back in 2006, which was really the genesis of the McKay challenges, and really revolutionized what I would consider our efforts in segmentation to the level that you've seen presented by folks today. So early efforts were primarily at OAR segmentation, which I would posit, based on what I'll show in a moment, is a nearly solved problem. You can see that segmentation of the parotid glands was one of the early challenges. This is work by David Jaffrey, where you could see that there was performance on the system in terms of volume overlap, 3D volume overlap at levels that approximate what you would see from human observer studies. Later work as part of a Mackay challenge by Ben Nelms showed this test case with oropharyngeal cancer and parotid challenges that were, exceptionally high performance. Now, not when you move to things like Dice coefficient, a little more subtle metric. Again, you're talking about performance metrics in the same range that most human observers would get, even in the early to mid 2000s. So this made its way into commercial software. So in 2014, we did a randomized study comparing human performance to AI-enabled segmentation software for organs at risk. You can see that for large structures such as the mandible or brainstem, these perform at or above human level performance, with AS being auto segmentation, AS plus resident being the resident, and MS being manual segmentation. But for small structures like the optic chiasm or indistinct structures like the oral cavity and cochleas, there was still some variation. These levels tell us that we had individual OAR-specific performance differences, which were quite substantive. So while you could use these techniques for mandible, they were unreliable for smaller structures like the oral cavity or the optic chiasm. And more importantly, if they missegmented a target structure as a normal structure, that would lead to underdosing and potentially kill the patient. So we really couldn't use those for in areas that were highly adjacent to GTV or tumor volumes and required quite a lot of manual play. At the same time, Carlos Cardenas and Lawrence Court's group were able to demonstrate that if given a reasonably generated gross tumor volume, that a large training model could successfully generate the contextualized clinical target volumes based on a library of plans. So this meant that if we just had a reasonably good GTV, which is itself not an easy task, that we could generate clinical target volumes quite easily. And so the performance varied quite a bit based on individual subregions, but nonetheless, what we found is that within these metrics, performance was relatively effective. We've seen then an expansion on this work in recent years, and again, we've been very heartened by Kareem, Wahid, and Dr. Mohamed Naser's work, showing that with multiparametric inputs in a very small sample set, we could achieve segmentation of tumor volumes, which again approximated human performance level. So using a kind of a standard architectural approach with both functional and anatomic imaging, Kareem and Naser were able to show that high performance cases were indistinguishable from expert observers, human medium performance cases which were acceptable for treatment, and even the low performing cases, the errors which were reasonably detectable and potentially screenable. Moreover, when we did a Turing test on these, Kareem and Naser were able to demonstrate that not only could we perform at human levels of segmentation performance, but in a confusion test, the individual observers could not discriminate human versus AI-generated segmentations, nor whether these segmentations were their own segmentations. So this has shown that at least there's potential for GTV segmentation. We'll talk briefly in a moment about the Hector challenge, but when we have even higher contrast to noise techniques like PET, these techniques are exceptionally effective. Now, the major problem is that while PET segmentation is a very rich data set and very well served, we don't have the ability to get PETs with high frequency. So we can only get a PET at the beginning and sometimes the middle of treatment. Nonetheless, this performance is really ahead of almost anything else we see. And the take-home message of these studies is that AI is probably as good or better than most humans' segmentation tasks for single time point segmentation. So why this challenge? With MR-Linac, we have the capacity for daily imaging, as we mentioned, of both anatomic and functional imaging. This allows us to have high seriality over time. But our major limitation is we must be able to segment these tumor volumes very rapidly, and we must be able to effectively implement these within a treatment planning system. So currently, our workflows are so human-dependent that we're lucky if we can do one mid-therapy segmentation at the top level. On trial, we have the manpower with a near full-time study support to do weekly segmentation and weekly manual replanning, which is layer B in the proposal. If you were able to just perpetuate a rigid registration, the tumor never changed. Row C would be perfectly fine. What we really want is daily iterative adaptation based on the prior day's data, and that's in row D. And that is really the genesis we're trying to do here. Head and neck tumor segmentation is so time-consuming that the average case historically for just segmenting GTVs and CTVs typically took on an order of magnitude of about an hour. And with very rapid resegmentation of GTVs only for a limited number of target volumes, you can get that online as low as 20 to 30 minutes, but that's still time that the patient has to be in a mask. Moreover, humans are very dependent on changes in the imaging inputs. So a good example is we see great differences moving from T2 and non-fat suppressed to fat suppressed images. And this is work by Travis Salzio, who showed that human observers really did quite differently. So I think I hit a little slide. So when we think about these challenges like we had seen before, we had seen in the prior Hector challenges, as we mentioned, performance on parotid gland segmentation that was at the level of normal tissue. However, if we look at CTV segmentation across lots of structures, again, we saw quite a bit of variability. But again, I would say that for brainstem, mandible, pharyngeal, parotid, and submandibular glands, we've met the bar, and those are clinically usable techniques. So in 2020, we were able to join the Hector Challenge, which focused on single time point tumor segmentation with PET as a ground truth and looked at prediction models and DICE scores. This was the first ever challenge on PET-CT segmentation. Best DICE was 0.76. Again, much improved over baseline, and human inter-observer agreement was within, a comparable range. The second challenge looked at, took that to the next level and looked at taking that information and not only making a segmentation, but an outcome prediction. But as we saw from a recent publication by Dr. Wahid, it appears that we're probably approaching max performance as we see this kind of convergence of inter-observer variability being already below the threshold that we could achieve on these challenges. So for, again, essentially, I would say, once you've exceeded human inter-observer variability, then everything else is really just approximation of the reference data set. So with Hunts-Merge, we took our sponsorship from NIDCR and NIH on these two awards. The primary goal being to enable on the NCI award the capacity to have daily automated segmentation of tumor and nodes, and then make adaptive changes based on planning, and leveraging data sets from a series of retrospective efforts. We then moved forward into the planning phases of the proposal. Our other funder, NIDCR, used a similar approach, looking at adaptive planning with diffusion-weighted imaging, and again, leveraging these rich data sets for the challenge. And that's where we land today. So we're thankful for the presentations that you've seen from today's presenters and those to come. The tasks you've seen described represent, we think, the baseline for what we feel is the next step. And on my final slide, I show that what the work that's being done today opens the door for human-level application and clinical trial testing. And what we've proposed is that work like that presented today should be moved forward into evaluation, testing, and clinical trial development. So we're thankful for all the participants. We're thankful for the organizers. But we also wanted to leave this slide here because we feel strongly that we're approaching a level that these can be made into something that's not only just a grand challenge or just a Mackay effort, but something that can really be applied directly to human patients and tested to see if we can improve patient care or automate patient care at a level previously undefined. So with that, I'll take time and thank the organizers and the staff of the study.
That's one question. So we'll give like a couple seconds. Maybe tell them if we have time for one question.
Oh, we have time for one question. Folks have one.
So
Gentile. So Yeah, FDG and PET really would likely improve the quality of the segmentation. And if our goal was single time point pre-therapy segmentation, the incorporation of CT imaging and FDG PET would both, we think, really enhance the performance of segmentation in that use case. But our driver, as you've seen from the presentation, is really daily high-frequency endogenous contrast adaptive imaging. And in that case, MR-only, limited number of sequences is really kind of the dominant logistical hurdle. So I think you could certainly get a very strong but somewhat different challenge if our goal was to say, let's implement multimodality imaging, PET, CT, multiparametric MRI, SPECT CT, for example, as opposed to the kind of use case that we've developed. But for the narrow use case we were funded for, I think this makes sense.
So one more question.
Yeah, so I think it's very clinical. It's very clinical relevant in the context of adaptive therapy. So the idea is, we have 33 daily images on some of these patients. If we have that, then perhaps the tumor performance on the initial step, which might be manually segmented, could be potentially enhanced as we move through time for daily segmentation. So there is a very rich, applicable, immediate use case for that kind of application, taking, again, high temporal frequency imaging. As you can imagine, the longer the time point between two image sets, the greater the probability of deformation or tumor changes. So perversely, higher frequency imaging may mean you have less required adaptation between steps, but higher overall accuracy. Jeff, thank you.
Okay. With that, we thank you all of our presenters for their beautiful presentations, and we will be giving a 10-minute break. And after the 10-minute break, we will be moving on with the second part of the presentations for task 2.
Yeah, I'll say it'll be a little bit shorter than 10 minutes, maybe like 5 minutes. I'll put the time right now on the. Okay, just about finishing up with the break period. We're gonna get settled in for the second half of the conference now. So here, we'll now move on to our task 2 talks. Dr. Mohamed Naser will be moderating this session, and like last time, the format will be a 7-minute video presentation for each team, followed by a 3-minute live Q&A with the authors. As before, please note the order of the presentations is not indicative of rankings, so be sure to stay tuned for the award announcements at the end to see the final rankings. Okay, and I'll pass it off to Dr. Naser.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to moderate task 2. Basically, this task is focusing on segmenting MET therapy, GTV, and we're giving prior information from the pre-treatment mask and imaging. So this is a first step toward what our keynote speaker is presenting about auto generation of GTV, CTV, and auto planning on a daily basis. Yeah, currently we use only 2 time points, but in the future we are going to use, we could leverage like a weekly based GTV segmentation in developing this model for reaching our goal for totally automated adaptive radiotherapy planning. So for the first speaker is from team HiLab, Lin Wang. So he's going to provide his first talk. And yeah, so
good morning, everyone. My name is Wang Yiqingyu. I'm a master candidate from University of Electronic Science and Technology of China. And today I will share our method of task 2 from Team HiLab with you on the HNTS-MRG 2024 challenge. Our method is a multi-strategy 5-fold training, using a multi-strategy 5-fold training regime, which encompasses utilizing fully supervised learning with various network architectures. We have experimented with encoder-decoder networks and dual encoder setups and pre-trained basic segmentation models augmented with mix-up techniques to enhance the performance. And my introduction of our research will having the following sections. For the challenge datasets, we split it into 5-fold for cross-validation and conduct cropping, normalization, and resampling. And we use both mic-RT and registered pre-RT with its labels. So during the cropping, we find the common region in the head areas of 2 images, and finally conduct cropping. And we incorporated second datasets is SIGGRAPH 2023 datasets. The processing process includes cropping, histogram matching, normalization, and resampling. And for the network we used, we first employed a VNet-like architecture named Basic Segmentation Network, which serves mic-RT and registered pre-RT with its labels as the inputs. For more complex scenarios, we have developed the dual flow units or DF units, which leverages two encoders and some cross-attention blocks, the blocks in purple, to fuse and enhance feature maps. And here is the details of the cross-attention blocks. They are CNN based, and this design not only reduces computational demands during training and inference, they are also distinguish the importance of different information flows within the network. We can see the F-mid and the F-pre here. In our pre-training phase, we utilize a patch-based approach from SIGGRAPH 2023 datasets, and each patch undergo a nonlinear transformation to bridge the gap between CT and MRI data. And this technique in domain generalization is designed to minimize the modality gap and enhance the network ability to generalize. Moving on to the downstream training, we incorporated mix-up. We expected this technology to mitigate the adverse effects caused by the samples that are all background categories. So for the raw input patches, we compute cross-entropy loss and dice loss with deep supervision. And for the patch from mix-up technique, we only compute cross-entropy loss and omit deep supervision. And our training regime include SGD optimizer with a meticulous setup training for 1,000 epochs with a sliding window strategy for inference. And we evaluated our model's performance using the aggregated dice similarity coefficients. As we can see in the results of base plus pre-RT, DF unit, and here the pre-train plus mix-up. The progress in our method design has not brought significant improvements to GTVP. We can see here from 61.32 to 61.42. No matter for the results for each fold or the 5-fold cross validation, and on certain folds, DF units design can bring significant improvements on GTVP and the performance of the final selected models are 62.42 for GTVP and 86.93 for GTVN. And let's take a quick look at the segmentation results of two examples. As you can see in the case on the left, DF units can achieve the performance without any techniques that basic network can only achieved with using pre-trained weights and mix-up. But for the case from another fold or validation sets, we found that due to some samples that are completely background, DF units overfits to the background categories here. In conclusion, our pre-trained techniques and mix-up augmentation have proven effective in enhancing segmentation performance. However, we acknowledge that there's room for improvements. We did not fully leverage mix-up and pre-trained weights in the DF unit training, and we believe a more focused oversampling strategy could improve our model's accuracy. And we also forgot to load the weights of task 1 models as initial weights of task 2. And those are all I want to share about the utilized methods, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, nice talk. So if you have any question, please raise your hand or write it in the chat. Okay, so I have a question here. So when you pre-train your model on CT, is there anything other than rescaling the histogram of the CT you have done? Like, for example, cropping the image to match what we have for the T2, like in the challenge, patch size, image resolution, etc. Or you pre-train on the image as given with the segmentation of the GTV provided in the own dataset without any other further processing. Do you hear me?
Sorry, I didn't listen clearly.
Yeah, okay. For when you pre-train the model before fine-tuning on the challenge data, so you pre-train on CT images with provided GTV segmentation, but you rescale the CT histogram to match the T2 for improvement the performance. Do you have any other main processing like cropping to match the same field of view for the images in the challenge, same image like resolution and the patch size used for both cases in the pre-train and fine-tuning?
The processing we sample we for example we resample the voxels to the same resolution between the two data sets, and the patch size during the pre-training is the same as is in the downstream training, and
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the speaker. We will go to the next one. Okay, second presentation will be from UW Lear, presented by Chin T. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Xin Tie from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Today, I'm excited to present our solution to task 2 of the HuntMerge 2024 challenge. My title is Mid-Treatment Gross Tumor Volume Segmentation using a mask-aware network in MRI-guided adaptive radiotherapy for head and neck cancer. Radiation therapy has been a cornerstone in the treatment of head and neck cancer. With modern technique like IMRT, we can target tumors more precisely while sparing normal tissues. However, the improved conformity enabled by IMRT poses a critical challenge. Anatomical changes during the course of treatment, such as tumor shrink or patient weight loss, can significantly impact dose delivered to tumor and surrounding organs at risk. To address this, adaptive radiation therapy optimizes treatment based on the patient's changing anatomy. Recently, MRI-guided adaptive radiation therapy has gained attention due to MR's superior soft tissue contrast, enabling more accurate tumor delineation. However, banning segmentation of gross tumor volume throughout therapy is time-consuming and subject to inter-observer variability. With advances in artificial intelligence, deep learning has been increasingly used to automate GTV segmentation across various cancers. While many studies focus on GTV segmentation in pre-treatment images, fewer studies have addressed the challenges of mid-treatment GTV segmentation. Radiation oncologists typically rely on pre-RT data to contour GTV on mid-RT scans, but effective methods for integrating prior images are still underexplored. In this study, we aim to develop deep learning models for automated GTV segmentation on mid-RT MRI in MRI-guided adaptive radiation therapy for head and neck cancer. Thanks to the HNTS-MRG 2024 challenge organizers, we have access to a high-quality, well-labeled dataset of 150 patients with registered pre-RT and mid-RT T2-weighted MRI images. The ground truth labels include primary gross tumor volume and metastatic lymph nodes. Our model's backbone is segResNet with deep supervision, a convolutional encoder-decoder model. Similar to the popular UNet model, it uses skip connection, but instead of concatenating features, it adds them at the decoder. To incorporate pre-RT information at intermediate layers, we designed a mask-aware attention module, adapted from well-known convolutional block attention module. Our primary modification was feeding pre-RT GTV masks into the special attention module. Specifically, we applied mask pooling and average pooling to the pre-RT GTV masks to match the spatial dimension of intermediate layer features. This was then concatenated and refined using a learnable convolution to get the spatial attention coefficients. We integrated the mask-aware attention modules at each level of the encoder. We also concatenated the mid-RT MRI image with pre-RT GTV masks as a model input. We refer to this architecture as mask-aware segResNet. During preprocessing, we resampled MRI images and corresponding GTV masks to a fixed isotropic voxel size of 1 millimeter. The model operates on patch inputs. The loss function was a compound loss comprising cross-entropy and dice loss. The dataset was split into 5 folds for cross-validation. We repeated it twice using different random seeds, yielding 10 models. For inference, we employed the sliding window approach and averaged the probability maps from the 10 models. We also applied a post-processing step called mask propagation through deformable registration, or MPDR. The basic idea is to first have the model predict the mid-RT GTV mask, and then we overlay the registered pre-RT mask to exclude non-overlapping contours, helping reduce false positives. Now, let's look at the quantitative results. In the cross-validation sets, our models achieved an average aggregated dice of 0.754 with 0.663 for GTVP and 0.845 for GTVN. The results remained consistent across the 2 different 5-fold splits. We also conducted ablation studies when we optimized the architecture and the training strategies. Here, we investigated 4 different factors. First, incorporating pre-RT GTV masks as model input provided the largest performance gain. Second, including pre-RT scans as additional training data with GTV mask channels set to zeros at input slightly improved the die score. Further improvements came from replacing segResNet with mask-aware segResNet and applying MPDR at post-processing. Now let's look at a simple case. The two images on the left show the ground truth GTV on the pre-RT MRI, and the two images on the right compare our model's prediction with the physician-labeled GTV on the mid-RT MRI. In this case, the boundaries align very well. In another case, our method did not perform well. As the arrow shows, the model mistakenly predicted a primary GTV on the mid-RT scan, even though there's no primary GTV in this case. In conclusion, our study introduced a novel deep learning-based methods for automatic GTV segmentation on mid-RT MR images, which could potentially streamline clinical workflows in MRI-guided adaptive radiation therapy for head and neck cancer. Additionally, our experimental results highlight the importance of integrating prior information in multi-time point imaging tasks. In the future, we plan to apply our approach to other longitudinal tumor segmentation tasks in radiation therapy. Lastly, I would like to thank the organizers of the HNTS-MRG 2024 challenge for holding such a great competition. I also want to thank the Center for High Throughput Computing at UW-Madison for providing GPU resources. With that, thank you all for your attention.
Yeah, great talk by the speaker. So do you have any question from the audience? Okay, so one question. So I see that the highest performance was achieved when you have like the mask-aware attention network module attached to every convolution layer, every layers from the network, and also you have the mid T2 and the segmentation mask for the free provided. But do you think that since we already included the information through the mask attention, do we need the mask as an input channel as well? Or do you have an experiment that show that if we have the same architecture without providing the mask as an input channel, does it degrade the results or not?
Just want to make sure, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so we indeed did some experiments when we exclude the pre-RT segmentation masks at the input. We indeed see the performance degradation in that case. Yeah, so that is the main reason why we also incorporate the pre-RT mask at the model input.
Yeah, and do you see any benefit also of including the image, the T2 pre-RT with the mask as well? With the mask attention aware module. So like the last model, but with also imaging from the pre-RT.
Well, so we did not see the improvements if we incorporate the pre-RT MRI scan. Yeah, that's so. Therefore, we did not include the pre-RT MR scans as additional input for our network.
Yeah, you've seen that in the previous experiment because you don't have the mask attention module attached, but with the mask attention module attached, I don't know if you have an experiment that show if there is benefit from the image.
We don't have such experiment. But that's indeed a very interesting point, and we can definitely look into this in the future.
Yeah, one last quick thing for the deformable image registration that you did for the post-processing step to remove any false positive and these things. The image already registered, so do you need additional DIR to do this post-processing step, or you could just use the registered image as is to remove any voxels that's not in the overlapping between the mid and the pre?
So we relied on the the registered MRI, the registered pre-RT scans provided by the organizers. And we directly use the ground truth GTV mask to exclude the non-overlapping contours.
Okay, so there is no additional DIR done at the end of that.
We did not apply any additional defaultable registration.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, no problem. And by the way, so our code and the model weights have been released in our GitHub repo, and feel free to check it out. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very useful. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, for the third presentation, we will, for the team, make DKFZ. Maximilian Zink will be presenting the third presentation. So please go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm happy to present our contribution to this challenge today, for which we explored the longitudinal segmentation capabilities of an unit. Here's the rough overview of our approach to task 2. The main goal was to integrate information from the previous time point into the model so that the mid-RT prediction is improved. We wanted to implement all of this in the NN-unit framework to inherit its segmentation performance. The basic assumption we made early on is that the registered pre-RT images do not contain major errors, so we discarded the unregistered scan and mask. Let's have a closer look at our approach. The basic setup in our experiments is always the following. The longitudinal segmentation model gets one or more of the inputs on the left and outputs the mask of the current time point. More specifically, we tried the following models. For this simple base model, we just stack the current and prior images in the channel dimension and train an NN unit on the current masks. The second model, which we call preseg, also uses the information in the prior mask by stacking a one-hot encoded tensor on top of the current and prior images. Finally, we have the skip-diff model. For this method, the current and prior images are encoded separately using encoders with their shared weights. The multi-scale representations are then combined in the skip connections with a special difference weighting block, and a single decoder is used to predict the current mask. There's one additional variant that we tried for the preseg model. Note that we did not call the images here pre and mid, but rather current and prior. Intuitively, the mid-RT data is assigned to current and the pre-RT to prior. But in principle, it's also possible to do it the other way around. The default behavior of our models is to randomize this assignment. This destroys the chronological order, but has the advantage of making the training dataset bigger. We thought, however, it could be possible that model capacity is wasted by making the model learn to predict both from mid to pre and from pre to mid. So we also implemented a version called preseg-C, C for chronological, which always sees pre and mid scans in the same order. After having presented the models we use, let's continue with the results. The first round of experiments was meant to identify the most promising out of those models. To find out how helpful the longitudinal information is, we also introduced a baseline which only predicts based on a single input image. 2 baseline models were trained, both using the default NN unit configuration. But for the only mid NN unit, we trained only using the mid-RT data, while for the pre and mid model, we trained on pre-RT and mid-RT data. As our computational resources for this challenge were limited, we initially trained and evaluated all models only on the first fold of data. The results showed that longitudinal segmentation models indeed improve upon the single time point NN unit. The largest gain came from the preseg model, which also got the pre-RT mask as input. For the final model selection, we trained the best models from the previous experiments on all 5 cross-validation folds and added a comparison between the pre-seg and pre-seg-C methods. In these experiments, the pre-seg-C method performed best, which indicates that always training the model with chronologically ordered inputs works slightly better for this dataset. Therefore, our final submitted model was pre-seg-C. As usual for NN unit during inference, we assembled the 5 models trained on the different cross-validation folds. Additionally, we had to reduce the number of mirroring steps for test time augmentation to stay below the inference time limit. Of course, there are many more things we could have tried for this challenge, and we are interested to hear which solutions the other participants found. So, in the name of my team, I thank you for your attention and let me know if there are any questions.
Thank you for the speaker, and yeah, we could get a couple of questions. We have more time, yeah, from the audience. Okay, there is one question. Could you give some a little bit more details about any extra data augmentation done outside the workflow of the NN unit done in this development of that model, and also for the pre-treatments, what dataset used, and if they have the similar batch size and image resolution and so on or not, because yeah. So we just need to have some information about that, if you could.
Yeah. So thanks for your questions regarding the data augmentation.
Yeah. Other than anything standard in the NN units already done through the training.
Actually, I think there was no additional training augmentation that we applied apart from the.
So we use the standard workflow as is.
Yes, exactly. We took as much as possible from an unit and yeah, just basically converted it to a longitudinal segmentation task. Yeah. And the second question was
any training or weight that you adopted from previous dataset or other dataset.
So for task 2, we didn't pre-train our models. It was just trained from scratch using the pre-RT and mid-RT images that were provided by the challenge. We also tried some pre-training for task 1, but there we didn't see so many gains. And actually, we also tried some multi-talent pre-training that was used, that was mentioned in the task 1 Q&As, and we didn't see many gains for this data set. So yeah, since our time and resources were a bit limited, yeah, we did not.
And this data was MR also, like T2 weighted imaging for task 1 that you pre-train on?
Oh, the data collection for task 1 for pre-training, this was a very diverse set that was not specialized to the head and neck task, but rather, yeah, many MR and CT images, like from public data sets.
Yeah, and when we train on public and diverse data set like that, and we want, like, coming from different scanner image resolution, patch sizes, and these things, how can we fine-tune that for our task, especially that we have like different number of imaging channels and we have outputs that is different in sizes and these things. So do we have anything that makes smooth transition from that we could just could adopt the weights, but we still are flexible to go to other domain? So do you have any idea how you did that?
So I mean, probably a colleague of mine could answer this question better, who is an expert on this pre-training and fine-tuning topic. What we did was quite simple. So during pre-training, I think the spacing was fixed and all the data was resampled with the same spacing. And in fine-tuning, there are different strategies. Either you can use the spacing used also during the pre-training, or you can try to transfer the weights with the custom spacing of the downstream tasks. But we did not do extensive experiments here. What worked better?
Okay.
So
any other question?
cannot say much.
Any other question from my audience? Yeah, if not, then we thank the speaker again, and we move to the last part of our challenge today. Okay. That's right.
All right, thank you very much to Dr. Mohamed for moderating that session. We're going to go ahead and move on to the final part of the conference today, which is the awards presentation and summary. Okay, for task 1, we're going to celebrate our top 3 teams. In third place, drum roll, we have Team Stockholm Trio. Congratulations to them. In second place, we have Team HiLab. Well done. And finally, taking first place, we have Team TUMOR with an outstanding DICE AG of 0.8254. So a big virtual round of applause for all of our top teams in task 1. To delve more into general results for task 1, we saw an impressive range of aggregated DICE results from our 18 participating teams, with mean scores ranging from 0.571 to 0.825, and an overall mean across all the teams of 0.783. The top performer, Team TUMOR, secured the highest overall aggregated DICE, which also included the best GTVN score of 0.873. Notably, Stockholm Trio achieved the highest GTVP aggregated DICE score with a result of 0.795. And here are some additional comparators, including the NNUnet baseline and in-reserve variability. So it's worth pointing out that only the top 3 teams managed to outperform the baseline score of 0.817. Moreover, the top 50% of participants, or the top 9 teams, outperformed the in-reserve variability threshold of 0.806, showing their strong performance. This is a box plot summary of all the results. And so again, a big congratulations to all the participating teams, regardless of your final ranking on the leaderboard. Just taking an initiative to develop and submit your methods is an impressive accomplishment. So whether or not you reach the top spot, your contributions are helping push this field forward. So that's something to be proud of. To quickly summarize task 1 with some text, task 1 demonstrated high performance overall, with the top teams achieving mean aggregated DICE results of around 0.8. And these results align closely with previous tumor segmentation challenges, such as Hector 2022. As mentioned, the top 50% of teams performed as well or better than in-reserve variability, highlighting the strength of the participants' approaches. One of the main observations was that GTVP structures were consistently more challenging to segment compared to GTVN. And it didn't seem like any single strategy emerged as the best for improving GTVP segmentation performance across all the teams, which reflects the complexity of the stacks. One observation we did notice for task 1 was that NNUnet-based solutions tended to predominate for the participant approaches. And as we saw, the baseline NNUnet performed strongly as well, technically achieving 4th place in the ranking. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the podium for task 2. In 3rd place, we have Team HiLab. Congratulations. Moving up to 2nd place, it is Team mic-dkfz. Great work. And finally, taking the top spot, our 1st place team is UW-Lair with a remarkable DICE score of 0.7328. So huge congratulations to all the teams for their impressive results. To delve a bit more into the general results for task 2, across the 15 participants, the mean aggregated DICE results range from 0.562 to 0.733, with an overall mean of 0.688. Team UW-Lair, as we saw, achieved the top result, but also got the top aggregated DICE for GTVP with 0.607. Team mic-dkfz, while coming in 2nd overall, achieved the best GTVN result with an impressive score of 0.875. To show some additional comparators, we have the NNUnet baseline, the null algorithm, and in-reserve variability. Most teams perform better than the NNUnet baseline, which is 0.633, and the null algorithm, which is 0.601. So interestingly, and again, the null algorithm is just using the registered pre-RT segmentations directly. It wasn't that much worse than the baseline NNUnet, which was only trained with the mid-RT images. Interestingly, only the top 4 teams, which make up the top 25% of participants, managed to exceed the inter-observer variability, which is 0.714. And here's a box plot summary of these results. And again, a big congratulations to all the participating teams, regardless of your final ranking on this leaderboard. To quickly summarize with some text, Task 2 proved to be more challenging than Task 1, with only the top 25% of teams surpassing inter-observer variability. One of the key challenges was the segmentation of the GTVP structures, which was significantly harder than GTVN. And this is likely due to tumor shrinkage and radiation-induced effects complicating the actual contouring process. In fact, only the first place algorithm overall was able to surpass GTVP in inter-observer variability performance. But I will note, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conference, that the measured inter-observer variability may be slightly inflated due to the exclusion of particularly challenging cases, which might set this benchmark a little bit higher than expected. Anyways, compared to GTVP, the GTVN segmentation was much easier, seemingly, in Task 2, even more so than in Task 1. And this is likely because the large nodes are persisting at mid-therapy, making the segmentation process simpler, especially if you're incorporating the pre-RT data, which is probably capturing most of the node to begin with. Interestingly, the baseline NA net underperformed when compared to inter-observer variability, with even a simple null model achieving similar results around 0.6. However, most submitted algorithms outperform both the NA and the null models, indicating the utility of these approaches. And as we saw with the top 3 methods, the most successful methods demonstrated the value of integrating the registered data into model development, which had a clear advantage for this more complex task. Just to kind of holistically get a sense of the results across the 2 tasks here, this is a box plot of the combined results. And you can really appreciate the big difference in performance between Task 1 and Task 2, especially for GTVP, which is that second tick there. Finally, to assess whether there was any relationship between the performance in both tasks, we conducted a correlation analysis for participants who completed both tasks. And the correlations were generally very weak, with no significant relationships found. This does suggest that strong performance in one task did not necessarily predict strong performance in the other for this particular challenge. Okay, moving on to some housekeeping here outside of the results. As part of the challenge, participants were required to submit a short paper detailing their methods. And these methods are being peer-reviewed and will be included in Springer Lecture Notes and Computer Science proceedings. So this not only allows the participants to formally present their work, but also provides them with a great opportunity for academic recognition. And so the review process for the post-challenge papers is well underway, and we've been very impressed with the submissions so far. We'll actually be awarding 1 Best Paper prize after all the reviews are in, and this will be based on the score rankings from the reviewers, followed by consensus voting from the program committee. And while there's no financial award for this, it'll be a great addition to the winner's CV and academic accomplishments. So we'll be announcing that winner in the coming weeks through email, so stay tuned for those results. Additionally, we have plans for a comprehensive public release of the dataset through the Cancer Imaging Archive. And so this release will include the full training and test data, which is 202 cases in total, along with the raw DICOM files and individual annotator segmentations. So these individual segmentations will hopefully enable researchers to perform some uncertainty quantification experiments, such as ambiguity modeling. And additionally, we'll also be providing clinical metadata to enrich the dataset. And to ensure ease of use for the research community, a detailed data descriptor will also be published alongside the release of the data. We're also excited to announce plans for a post-challenge secondary analysis paper, which will be submitted to a high-impact field-specific journal. So this paper will be conducting a meta-analysis of all the algorithms submitted, exploring topics such as inter-algorithm variability, consensus segmentation experiments, and patient-specific sub-analyses. So this will be in line with previous secondary analysis papers, like have been done for the Hector challenges in medical image analysis. And eligible participants who successfully submitted their Docker containers and their LNCS papers will be invited to be co-authors for this manuscript. So we'll be in contact with the eligible participants about that in the coming months. And while the challenge provided valuable insights, there are some limitations to acknowledge. First, the data set was modest in size and came from a single institution, which may limit its generalizability. So we focus specifically on oropharyngeal tumors instead of head and neck cancer more generally. Importantly, we relied on typical clinician annotation workflows, but strict annotation guidelines would have been very beneficial to ensure consistency. Moreover, there was potential for expanding the data set with additional imaging modalities such as PET-CT or multiparametric MRI, which could have improved the accuracy of future segmentation models. And that was actually mentioned by Jintao earlier. Finally, while we aim for robust evaluation using aggregated dice, our choice evaluation metrics could be further expanded in future iterations. So recent tumor segmentation challenges involving multiple objects, like some of these BRATS challenges, have employed more sophisticated measures like lesion-wise dice. There's also more recently developed metrics such as the object normalized dice proposed by Reina et al., which may offer advantages in handling volume discrepancies. And of course, for RT-related tasks, incorporating surface distance measurements alongside the volumetric measurements could provide a more comprehensive evaluation. And finally, as most of you who participated unfortunately quickly became familiar with, the grandchallenge.org backend didn't have the best GPUs, which led to some issues with completing inference in the 20-minute time limit. So my understanding is that Grand Challenge is actively working on getting better compute resources for these Docker inference challenges. So hopefully this will be less of an issue in the future. And at this point, there's no concrete plans for a second edition of the HNTS-MRG challenge, but future iterations remain a possibility. So if we do move forward, future editions could include more diverse imaging sequences and additional intra-treatment images with a possible focus on MR-Linac technology. Additionally, we would aim to include multi-institutional data to increase the dataset size and diversity, which of course capture a wider range of imaging protocols and patient populations. So yeah, expanding the dataset in this way would provide broader insights into the performance of MR-guided radiotherapy. To kind of wrap things up, the HNTS-MRG 2024 challenge successfully tackled MRI-based automated tumor segmentation across 2 key tasks, focusing on pre-RT and mid-RT segmentation. The challenge attracted significant global interest with 107 registrants and 19 final eligible teams. As we saw, Task 1 had strong performance, with most algorithms achieving aggregated dice scores that were comparable to or even surpassing clinician and observer variability. Task 2, however, proved to be more challenging, though the top algorithms did manage to outperform both the baseline models and clinician and observer variability. And across both tasks, we saw that segmenting the primary tumor consistently posed a greater challenge compared to the lymph nodes. So looking ahead, future challenges, like we said, should focus on harmonizing clinician guidelines, increasing dataset diversity, and expanding the range of evaluation metrics. We'd like to express our deep gratitude to everyone who contributed to making this challenge a success. From the organizing committee and contributors to the many peer reviewers and technical teams, there's too many people to name, but your efforts have been crucial at every single step of this journey. We also want to acknowledge the support from platforms like grandchallenge.org, TCIA, and the teams at MD Anderson for their assistance. And lastly, we very much appreciate the funding support from the NIH, which made this all possible. And finally, a big thank you to all of the participants. Your hard work, creativity, and dedication made this challenge truly a success. And of course, thank you to the audience today for attending. Before we open the floor to any final questions, I want to remind you that we've set up a general email address for the challenge, so feel free to reach out with us with any questions for inquiries or feedback. Okay, and so this is the end of the presentation. I'll stick around a little bit longer if anyone has any questions or closing thoughts. But yeah, thank you all so much for your time.
We just wanted to kind of acknowledge everybody's hard work. You know, these challenges are a huge amount of outlay of effort by the organizers. They're a huge outlay of effort by the participants. The speed at which these challenges advance the field is, I would argue, probably faster than almost any other activity that we've seen in machine learning and medical imaging. And I just want to thank, you know, we talked, you know, we often frame this as a competition where there's, you know, kind of winners at the top. But I think at the end of the day, every participant really contributed scientifically in a way that's incredibly meaningful. And we want to recognize your contribution as much as possible. We appreciate the manuscript submitted. But we also would heavily encourage you to, if there are ways that you can either allow us to post segmentations of the data on TCIA, or that you can make components of your work as accessible or public as possible, that really just drives the field forward, because you saw how much, you know, prior data sets like BRATS or prior data sets from segmentation challenges in the past have advanced what we saw today. So just really want to encourage everybody to continue that fantastic momentum. And, you know, I think, you know, there are some years where you come out on top of the challenge, and some years where you're you know, kind of towards the bottom. But either way, that's a huge contribution to science and should not be in any way minimized for any of the participants.
Absolutely. With that, great send-off. Thank you everybody for attending again, and we'll close the webinar now, but as always, you can reach out to us with any questions or thoughts. Thank you all.